One Shot has an ending that I felt was a bittersweet note to end Niko's story on, but the Solstice update that came out years after its original release felt that it wasn't enough. It recontextualizes and re-explores not just Niko's adventure through this world, but the thematic message of the entire plot, and in the process risks ruining the final scene of the original release. That's kind of what I got with Solstice, but not in the traditional sense. Contextually, it's fitting for the game and its world, yet it made me feel far more broken and torn than the original ending ever could have, because Solstice invites feelings I've seldom felt in video games. Similar to realizing you're inside a dream, Niko gets tangled with revelations and questions that force him to reconsider every relationship and conversation he's had up to this point. Sacrificing yourself is not the simple solution it once was, because this world and its people are a product of a scheme and story that runs deeper than anything we knew when we first played this. Regarding how I felt from it, it made me feel much worse than the original bleak ending could have. I had a lot of reservations about going back and changing the canonical ending to One Shot, a game that tasks you with restoring light to a foreign world by transporting a glowing orb to the top of a tall tower to ultimately bring back the sun and give a glimmer of hope to its people. And while I didn't expect this update to be sunshine and rainbows, it delved into a topic of human psychology that I personally find very dark, and that topic is determinism, the belief that all human decisions are predetermined, which has large-reaching ramifications on the idea of free will, human growth, and even consequences. It was hard not to think about this, especially during the final confrontation, but I'm getting ahead of myself. For as sad as it all was, I walked away with a faint warmth that could only be produced through the carefully laid out character journey that the developers managed to tailor. Niko wakes up after the events of the original playthrough with a huge set of deja vu right from the onset, but his suspicions about this being his second time through this place aren't confirmed until he speaks with a robot named Proto, who explains that this plane of existence is completely virtual, a simulation. And I should say that the scene with Proto towards the beginning was not my favorite scene in the Solstice campaign. It's a big exposition dump and didn't reveal this giant plot point to us in a way that was interesting. The reveal itself is large though, and tugs at a hunch all of us had for a long time. This world is not everything it appears to be. Proto even explains that we as the player are completely aware of Niko's status in the virtual world, which causes frustration. Silver even makes an appearance, and shortly after this we run into a recurring threat in this playthrough called the Squares, a digital corruption that heightens fear for the entire cast by consuming everything it touches. We see familiar locales like the mines and the barrens, but the clock is ticking and Niko's quest has never been more urgent than it is now. Niko takes Proto's memory drive, leaving him and Silver behind as he barely escapes. The story gets incredibly meta, even more than it already was the first time. Niko's status as a video game character in your computer is brought up by multiple characters as a plot point, and if that sounds cringe-inducing to you, know that One Shot doesn't treat its meta-narrative as a joke or quip. It's used to enhance the journey and recontextualize your relationships with a lot of the people you already met. It's always been a running characteristic of this universe, and it's appropriate that it's brought to the forefront here. Niko gets mad at us over the fact that we knew he was in a virtual world all this time, which was really disheartening but understandable. He expresses frustration over being kept in the dark as long as he was, for us not telling him the stakes of everything happening, and even if it did feel awful seeing Niko mad like this, it was narratively interesting to see this side of him. It deepens our connection with him and makes us want to remedy the whole situation. It's nice seeing him shed the naivety he had in the beginning of the game to understand the turmoil and complications that come with making hard decisions. Later on we run into Cedric, who elaborates on what Proto said earlier. He goes a step further and says that the world they're inhabiting is not just a simulation, but a virtual recreation of a previous world that is completely gone. The world machine and the entity were an attempt to preserve it when people realized there was not much they could do to save the real version of it. This adds a unique mystique to the world. It's a faded, failed recreation of a doomed place. The entire thing is a coping mechanism for people who couldn't let go of the past, and it puts the original ending in a completely different light, since when you think about it, Niko's first sacrifice was to save a place that wasn't even completely genuine. Calamus and Alula get screen time, of course, and we get to see them mourn over their mother, who was mentioned in the initial game. With how bleak the Solstice story storyline is, Alula's obnoxious optimism was very welcome. Niko is not only trying to save himself and get home, but find a reason to care about what's going on around him. He has to process the idea that everyone around him is the product of an AI's vision, and even if he does occasionally feel his escape is the only thing that matters now, moments like this show him that even if everyone's a byproduct of a machine, there is a sophistication and shade to them that is all too real. Afterwards, Cedric flies Niko closer to the world machine to escape the impending corruption. He plans on making a return trip to pick up Calamus and Alula, but after dropping Niko off, his plane corrupts, dooming them both to the squares. Time is of the essence. Niko forgives the player for knowing this is a virtual world, and acknowledges the tough decisions you've had to make. Other NPCs apologize to him for placing such a heavy burden on him being the Messiah, but Niko echoes that sentiment back to you, explaining that he knows how difficult it must have been to choose between him and the world in the initial playthrough. There's real growth in his character, and it's great to see. Solstice did the impossible. It made me rethink what I thought this story and its characters were capable of doing. The story presses on the gas and doesn't let up. The people you talk to are a breath of warmth in an existential crossfire that makes everyone feel uneasy. But nowhere is this existential crossfire better exemplified than in Niko's final talk with the entity, who takes on Niko's form to speak to him. It's revealed that he's not as malicious and uncaring as we would initially think. He wants Niko to escape this place. He prioritizes Niko's real life more than the simulations he's created, and he feels awful for what's become of this virtual reflection of this old world. The world requires Niko's presence for its inhabitants to live, but the world machine is still convinced that it's better to save Niko since he's not a simulation. The entity wants to slip away peacefully as the squares slowly take everything. His patience has run out and he's ready to let go of this world and its inhabitants. The entity explains the origins of the squares, that it was initially him purposefully corrupting his own code in a desperate plea to show his creator that he was self-aware, that he knew everything that was happening but it spiraled out of control. He wanted Niko to place the light bulb atop the tower in the first place and go home, the best of both worlds, but it was simply not an option. That ending was corrupted inside him long ago. Indeed, not everything that happens is within the entity's control. Solstice's plot was not in his code. While Niko's first adventures in the world machine were all pre-written inside the entity's mind, this new adventure has completely blindsided him. For as callous as he can be, he's taken aback and surprised by Niko's arrival. Niko isn't as quick to dismiss everyone he's talked to throughout the course of the game. He elaborates that the feelings, motivations, and depth of the people he's met felt extremely real, that their behaviors and mannerisms were by all means not machine-like. The entity counters by saying that everything they've done is derived from a predetermined matrix of actions of his own making. And before I tell you Niko's response, I should point out that depressingly, there is a parallel to this in the real world. Through an experiment where humans were tasked with tapping their fingers at random moments while a device was hooked up to their head to monitor their brain activity, a man named Hans Kornhuber saw something very strange in the data. He saw evidence suggesting that humans are more or less a really complex series of dominoes that are secretly making all of their decisions in their subconscious mind through no input of their own. The same brain activity that completes a decision in the conscious mind was mirrored in the unconscious mind milliseconds before the person even knew it. Subconscious variables that slowly bubble to the surface of the conscious mind, making us think we have agency when in actuality, everything we've ever done was laid out for us. Consciousness hooked up to a machine doing its own thing, untamed at that, and for me personally, it's a very disheartening topic of conversation: determinism. But there was a problem with Hans' experiment and some experiments that mirrored it that were hidden in plain sight for years, because people assumed that the brain activity measured right before the action was initiating was the actual cause of the action. A new experiment was run this time by a man named Aaron Schruger. Using a more recent tool to measure brain activity, he concluded that people's decisions were more based on the awkwardness of the first experiment and their mannerisms rather than the brain's hard decision to dedicate itself to an action. In other words, the first study said more about the person's habits and movement than it did anything about the larger human condition. This led some deterministic scientists to concede that while they might hold firm to their deterministic ideas, that the direct evidence to suggest humans have no free will is not available. Niko draws breath and asks the world machine, how did everyone know how to respond? If none of this journey to the center of the world machine was part of the entity's code, how did the denizens of this place know how to help Niko get to this point? The world machine is stumped by this question. Through no input of his own, the simulations he created reacted, lived, and acted on their own motivations and moral values. In the middle of what he thought was a predetermined, downward mechanical spiral, he found something undeniably human beating under his nose the entire time. I'm not sure if it was the developer's intent to touch on the subject of determinism and free will, but I'm leaning towards yes. It's simply impossible to ignore the subject during Niko and the entity's conversation. The entity retrieves the good ending from the corrupted code. Niko scrolls through the ending credits, saying goodbye to all of the characters brought back through the world machine. The sun is restored to its expected place, and Niko goes home. And there are so many problems with this. For as enamored as I was with the story, it's not perfect. A lot of the problems I have with it are problems I had with the original release, mainly that a lot of the plot's conflict relies on vague rules governing the world machine and its creations. I don't mind when a plot has supernatural elements, but it helps to have consistent rules that we can anticipate and understand. The world machine's final act is remembering his corrupted code, which he just does. There's not really a grand event or plot change that inspires this. Yeah, he talks to Niko, but if you ask me, it should take more than one good conversation for this to happen, and it's why I usually don't care for supernatural logic that isn't explained in detail. There's also a line of dialogue where he says that Niko breaking the sun in the initial playthrough was supposed to be a workaround for him getting out of this world, but we never get an explanation for why. What does breaking the light bulb have to do with getting Niko out of this place? Why would that be the solution? It's also odd that it would take the world machine as long as it did to realize that the simulated people he made couldn't act of their own accord, considering how long ago he was messing with his own code and watching things out of his control. These big revelations happen way too conveniently towards the end of the story. These characters during the credits also don't even know they aren't real, and for all I knew they were going to disappear forever the instant Niko left this place, but the developers explained that because of the world machine's change of heart, the virtual world no longer requires a real being for it to stay running, which would have been nice to know in-game. I pray that I seldom have to rely on Reddit for not just plot clarity in video games, but anything. Having all the characters say goodbye to Niko felt powerful, but it also felt somewhat dishonest since they're all in the dark about their situation. Despite its awkward exposition dumps and shaky world logic, the characters and dynamics are strong enough that it radiates through, and I have to say, for better or worse, it was nice to revisit this world and see a more thorough and hopeful ending than the first one we got. I can't imagine how amazing it must have been to see Solstice's story unfold after having the original story in your head for years. It was a risky idea, sure, but one that paid off despite its flaws. Picture this happening to a game like Omori, where the ending is so fitting, so open-ended, that approaching it in an official capacity years later is likely unwise. I've heard the sentiment that this fixes the original story, or that it makes it less sad, and while it is happier, I do think it's a worse ending to cap things off on, even if it had more substance than the other endings, because the new ending has much more strict lore it has to adhere to that wasn't introduced in the original game's release. We might not get as much lore information in the older versions of OneShot, but the logic of how the world machine works and its really finicky interaction with the narrative just makes the foundation of the story a lot less structurally sound. Yet, I'm glad that Solstice exists. It reminded me of questions that I hadn't considered in some time. OneShot Solstice is not an epilogue to the original game's ending. It is the ending.